Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking on, well, one of the most intellectually demanding and frankly often misunderstood questions in modern philosophy. We're looking at Edmund Husserl's quest to figure out how an objective world is even possible.
Right.
And tied into that, how we can account for other people existing without, falling into this trap of radical isolation, of solipsism.
It really is a foundational question, isn't it? About the very possibility of knowledge itself.
Absolutely.
And our deep dive today, it's really centered on Husserl's work on this concept of intersubjectivity. Primarily, we're looking at his Cartesian meditations.
Which is famously dense material.
Oh, extremely. Highly technical, and like you said, so often misinterpreted. I think a lot of critics approach it with traditional metaphysical baggage,
Right, expecting a certain kind of answer.
Exactly. And they fundamentally miss how radical Husserl's project actually is.
Well, we've got a pretty solid stack of sources here, all aimed at trying to clarify what Husserl was really up to. So our mission today is to cut through some of those decades of misreadings, hopefully, and show you, the listener, what Husserl was actually trying to achieve.
And it's crucial to state up front. This isn't about giving some traditional proof that other people exist.
Yeah, that's the standard problem of other minds.
Which Husserl, frankly, found a bit superficial for his purposes. He wanted to go deeper.
So what is the focus then, if not proof?
It's strictly about conceptual clarification. We need to understand the fundamental concepts, the grammar, if you like, that makes a shared objective world possible in the first place.
Okay, the underlying rules.
Precisely. And for you listening, this really offers a crucial insight, maybe an aha moment about the transcendental mechanisms, the deep structures by which we even define truth and reality. It forces us to examine our most basic assumptions about what it means to know something objectively.
So we're not asking if truth exists, but more like, what conceptual setup do we need for something to even count as true for multiple people?
You've got it. What structure must be in place?
It sounds like Husserl is asking us to, reboot our whole concept of reality from the ground up, which sounds, honestly, terrifyingly difficult.
It is difficult, no question. And that difficulty is precisely why he starts with such a radical method.
Okay, let's dive in then. Let's unpack this. We should start by trying to define the nature of Husserl's specific project, maybe separating his mission from the standard philosophical problems he often gets mistaken for tackling.
Right. So when we talk about the framework of the Cartesian meditations, the first big hurdle, really, is grasping that Husserl's investigation is purely phenomenological.
Okay, what does that mean in this context? Purely phenomenological.
It means it's operating entirely on a conceptual, structural level. He's not doing empirical science. He's not doing traditional metaphysics where you argue about what really exists out there. He's performing what he calls a transcendental clarification, looking at the conditions of possibility for experience itself.
So like you said, defining the rules of the game before anyone starts playing. But why? Why did he feel this was necessary? Why not just, accept the common sense idea that other people and a world exist?
Because phenomenology, for Husserl, was meant to be the radical foundational science, the absolute starting point for all genuine philosophy.
The bedrock.
Exactly. And to achieve that, it had to free itself from every single presupposition we take for granted in our everyday lives, what he called the natural attitude, our uncritical belief in the world's existence.
So he needed a starting point that didn't assume anything about the world.
Precisely. An a priori starting point, one completely independent of any metaphysical assumptions about what exists.
And this is where the famous, or maybe infamous, phenomenological epike comes in, the reduction.
That's it, the epike. It's often described as an act of, philosophical bracketing or suspension. You deliberately set aside the question of whether the world or other minds actually exist out there.
You'd ignore it.
Not ignore it, but suspend judgment on its reality. You focus only on the sheer experience, the meaning of those concepts, world, other person, as they appear to your consciousness.
Okay.
And this radical process, it leaves you with the transcendental ego, my pure consciousness, as the only absolutely unquestionable starting point. Because I can't doubt that I'm experiencing, even if I doubt what I'm experiencing.
Wow, okay. That does sound intensely lonely, though, even if it's just a methodological step.
It does.
Because if he stripped away the assumed reality of the external world, he can't rely on things like seeing another person's body or hearing their voice.
Exactly. Or using inductive reasoning based on observed patterns.
Right, because all those things depend on the existence of that natural world he just bracketed, put in suspension.
That's the core tension. And that's why his goal regarding intersubjectivity isn't, and couldn't be, to find empirical proof of the other's existence.
So what is the goal, then?
It's to explicate the concept of existing others, to understand how the meaning of the other person is built up or constituted within my own transcendental sphere of consciousness.
Okay, so it's about the structure of the idea of the other within me.
Yes. How does that idea necessarily arise and take shape within conscious experience?
I like the analogy you used earlier. It's not proving 2 + 2 = 4. It's defining what 2 plus and equals even mean in this foundational system.
That's a very good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Husserl is essentially providing the transcendental rule book, the definitions, for the entire structure of reality as we experience it.
And our sources are stressing that this isn't just some philosophical side quest for him, right? This clarification.
Oh, absolutely not. It's central. A major task of his entire analysis is to provide a rigorous account of the scientific character of phenomenology itself.
How so?
Well, if phenomenology claims to be the foundational science, it has to justify itself. If Husserl can't show how fundamental concepts like objectivity and truth are grounded within his system, starting from the ego,
Then the whole claim collapses.
precisely, the claim to be the foundational science falls apart.
So digging into how the alter ego, the other person, is constituted, that's crucial for justifying the entire phenomenological project.
It really is. Because if I, the transcendental subject starting this whole process, can't conceptually constitute the possibility of an other subject.
Then everything remains just my private experience.
Exactly. My experience remains purely private, maybe even idiosyncratic, and ultimately it's useless for building any kind of objective science or shared understanding.
Okay, I see the stakes now.
So what he's tracing is what he calls the transcendental genesis of objectivity. First, how the alter ego is constituted, how its meaning and sense are built up, and then how the objective world is subsequently constituted by this very intersubjectivity.
And this whole process is observed. How?
It's observed from the standpoint of the transcendental subject, the one doing the reduction.
Okay.
But the claim is that it yields universally valid conceptual structures.
So when critics come along demanding empirical evidence, like, show me the other person through sense perception, that's missing the point.
Fundamentally missing the point. It's a natural demand from the everyday perspective, sure.
Yeah, it feels intuitive.
But they're overlooking the fact that Husserl must clarify these concepts a priori before any appeal to the empirical world he has deliberately bracketed.
He has to stay within the system he created.
Correct. If he started with empirical assumptions like, well, I see a human body over there that looks like mine, so...
Then it wouldn't be the radical presuppositionless beginning he was aiming for.
Exactly. He needs to demonstrate that the conceptual necessity of the other is woven into the very fabric, the very structure of my consciousness itself, not just that I happen to bump into other people empirically.
Okay, so if we accept this radical starting point, that Husserl is defining concepts, not proving existence in the usual way, let's look at the result of this constitution process, the objective world. How does he define that term? Because it sounds like it's going to be more rigorous than how we normally use it.
Oh, it has to be. The objective world, within Husserl's very specific framework, is fundamentally defined by the notion of an objectively valid result.
Objectively valid result.
And flowing from that, the concept of truth. If something belongs to the objective world, it has to be capable of being true in a way that's stable, repeatable, and crucially universally affirmable.
So it transcends my private, fleeting experience.
Exactly. It has to be something that holds beyond just my own stream of consciousness. And this high standard of truth, he argues, applies not just to, say, physics, but to all scientific endeavors, including philosophy itself.
Okay, so what's the mechanism? What lifts my private subjective sensation, let's say, I see this table as blue, into becoming an objectively valid result? How does that happen conceptually?
This is where intersubjectivity really does the heavy lifting. It acts as the conceptual engine driving objectivity. A result achieves objective validity, meaning it becomes publicly accessible and universally affirmable when it is testable and reproducible by other subjects. The possibility of other subjects thinking about it, discussing it, validating it. The fact of the table's blueness must, in principle, be affirmable by you, by anyone. not just by me alone.
So objectivity isn't just about the object itself out there. It's about the validation process, the fact that I can, conceptually, invite other minds to share and test the same meaning.
That's the core transcendental mechanism he identifies. Our sources really emphasize that this whole process relies entirely on intersubjective validation.
Meaning confirmation by others.
Yes, but more rigorously, an objective result must be able to withstand every criticism. It has to be confirmable through the mutual criticism of every possible subject.
Every possible subject. That's a high bar.
It is. So if a scientist makes a claim, S is P is true. They are implicitly claiming, Husserl would say, that they can provide the evidence such that any other subject operating under the same ideal conditions must affirm that evidence as relevant to that truth.
Can we make that a bit more concrete? Give me an example, maybe.
Sure. Let's take your table example. If I just say, this room feels warm, that's purely subjective, right? It might be true for me, but not for you. It lacks objective validity.
Okay.
But if I introduce a thermometer, standardized instrument, and I say the ambient temperature is 22 degrees Celsius, and that thermometer is calibrated, and you, or anyone else, could look at it under the same conditions and read the same number.
Then we're moving towards an objectively valid result.
Exactly. The objectivity isn't inherent in the temperature itself somehow magically floating free, but in the fact that the reading, the result, withstands this potential for mutual testing and confirmation.
Ah, I see. The reproducibility and testability by others is key.
Precisely. So the world's objectivity, therefore, isn't just some external given that we passively receive. It's understood in terms of its transcendental genesis, its origin story within consciousness, grounded in intersubjectivity.
So it's a result of a co-constitution.
Yes. A co-constitution involving the original transcendental subject, the ego, doing the analysis, and the co-constitutor, which is the alter ego, the other subject.
So the objective world is literally built, conceptually speaking, by this relationship between the I and the other, like a joint construction project.
That's a great way to put it. It's a shared conceptual construction. And because the world's sense or meaning is co-constituted in this way,
Yes.
intersubjectivity ensures that the world experienced by one transcendental ego isn't just a private dream or illusion. It's what Husserl calls a pre-constituted fact.
Pre-constituted fact. That sounds very abstract. What does that mean, practically?
It means that the essential structure of this reality, its meaning, is already defined in such a way that other experiencing subjects must inherently share the sense of that same fact in them, as the sources put it.
So the very definition of objective fact already contains the idea of it being shareable.
Yes, the world is conceptually structured from the outset as a common world, a world whose meaning is inherently available for co-affirmation by multiple subjects.
That's really fascinating. It implies that the very meaning of something objective, like, say, the laws of physics or the properties of matter, must conceptually carry within it the possibility of being shared, of multiple egos confirming it.
Exactly. The possibility of another perspective, another ego, is, in a sense, woven into the very definition of objective reality from the start.
Because if it weren't,
if the concepts were purely private, locked within my own subjective flow, they could never achieve that stability, that reproducibility, that universal validity we demand of objective truth.
Right. The constitution of objectivity absolutely depends on the conceptual possibility of shared sense-making. Okay, this leads us very naturally into why the concept of the other, the alter ego, gets such a privileged foundational position in Husserl's analysis. You've basically established that intersubjectivity is the engine driving objectivity, which implies it must have conceptual priority. It has to come first in the explanation.
Absolutely. And Husserl's very explicit about this. The structure of his argument in the Meditations is defined by what our sources call a hierarchical set of problems.
By hierarchy.
Yes. And he explicitly frames intersubjectivity as the fundamental philosophical problem that he must address before he can properly tackle anything else, like the nature of the objective world or truth.
So you have to clarify the lower, more foundational concepts first,
before you can clarify the higher level concepts that logically depend on them.
So the shared self, or at least the possibility of a shared self, must conceptually come before the shared world. I can't define a reality shared by multiple subjects without first defining what a sharing subject even means conceptually.
That is the crucial insight. And it's one that critics often miss when they jump straight to demanding proof of the external world.
Right.
The concepts of the objective world and the objectively valid result, these high-level concepts must presuppose the concept of intersubjectivity for their own clarification.
If you skip that step,
If you jump straight to talking about truth, without first clarifying how a truth can be intersubjectively identical, meaning the same truth for everyone, then you fall right back into the confusion and the assumptions of the natural attitude, which Husserl was trying to overcome.
It's like trying to build the house, the objective world, before you've laid the foundation, the conceptual possibility of intersubjective subjects.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
The whole structure risks collapsing back into just subjective opinion or ungrounded belief.
So the world only becomes objective, in his rigorous sense, when its truths are established as intersubjectively identical truths.
Yes. And that link, the connection between the constitution of the other subject and the establishment of this objective identity of truth, that's the precise mechanism. That's what moves us conceptually from the privacy of my individual experience into a shared, potentially universal reality.
This really shifts the focus, doesn't it? It fundamentally changes the nature of the problem he's trying to solve. His focus is squarely on constitution.
The meaning-making process, yes.
Rather than attempting to prove mere existence, which is where the traditional problem of other minds often gets bogged down.
Exactly. And this is why Husserl's problem, the problem of constitution, retains its phenomenological priority. The core question for him is, how is the meaning of the other subject recognized, built up, constituted within my own consciousness?
Not if they're out there somewhere.
No. He wants to determine the meaning of the assertion, there is another subject. That's a deeper, more foundational task than simply determining its empirical truth or falsity based on seeing a body or hearing a voice.
So the fifth meditation isn't a failed proof of other minds, which is how it's sometimes painted.
Definitely not.
It's really a successful conceptual groundwork exercise. It's defining the limits and the possibilities of shared truth, starting from the only absolute certainty, my own experience in consciousness.
Precisely. And if you miss that distinction, constitution versus existence, you basically miss the entire point of transcendental phenomenology.
Okay, but this leads us directly to the most, let's say, contentious part of Husserl's entire project. The moment where he forces himself and us as readers into that very tight, seemingly lonely space.
The charge of solipsism.
Exactly. Because Husserl performs the epiche, he brackets the world, he reduces himself to his absolute transcendental ego. The sources confirm that critics immediately pounce. They argue that a phenomenology designed to solve the problem of objective being is therefore just stuck. It's branded as transcendental solipsism.
And that criticism feels powerful, doesn't it? Because the epiche does feel incredibly isolating at first glance.
It really does. If I've stripped away the world and I'm left only with the structures of my own consciousness, how on earth can I ever legitimately move beyond the limits of my own ego?
Right. The danger seems to be that any world or other I constitute is just a projection, just my rules, my meanings, playing out in my own head.
So how does Husserl defend against this? Internally, within his own system. He can't just wave his hands and say, don't worry, I'm not a solipsist.
No, he has to show it. He argues that while the starting point is necessarily restricted to the transcendental ego, he does not become solipsistic in the damning sense.
No.
And crucially, he does not remain that way.
Okay.
His entire analysis, particularly in the fifth meditation, is structured specifically to show that phenomenology, when it's properly carried out, does not entail solipsism. The goal is precisely to demonstrate how the other can be legitimately constituted from within that seemingly solitary starting point.
So for Husserl, this state of transcendental solipsism isn't the end result?
Not at all. It's not the final destination, but rather a subordinate stage in his overall analysis.
A necessary step you have to pass through.
Yes, a methodologically necessary step.
Why? Why is it necessary to even go through that stage? Why risk the criticism?
Because he must start there to ensure that the subsequent analysis of intersubjectivity is purely transcendental. It has to be absolutely free from the contamination of any empirical presuppositions smuggled in from the natural attitude.
Got it. Keep it pure.
He has to analyze how the alter ego is constituted purely for the ego, within the ego's own sphere of experience, by deliberately treating his own consciousness as the only instance of the transcendental ego at this specific methodological stage.
Yes.
He claims he's uncovering the essential features, the universal structures, that would necessarily be held by any possible instance of a transcendental ego.
Okay, let me see if I follow that. He's using his ego, my ego, when I do the reduction, as the test case, the example subject,
Right.
to figure out the universal rules for how consciousness constitutes the meaning of an other. And if he can discover that rule book within his own reduced experience.
Then that rule book, those structures, must apply universally to all egos, because the reduction process is designed to strip away everything personal and leave only the universal essential structures of consciousness itself.
That's the logic, okay? If the ego I'm left with is pure and reduced, its structures are universal and essential.
That's the claim. Therefore, if the concept of the alter ego can be shown to be necessarily constituted within this reduced sphere,
then the possibility of the other isn't just something I happen to believe in, it's an inherent, necessary conceptual feature of any consciousness.
precisely. It's built into the very structure of being a subject.
But hang on, there's still a challenge here, isn't there? The ego doing the constituting is still mine. Even if the structure discovered is claimed to be universal, the actual process of the genesis of the objective world still happens in my sphere.
That is the nub of the lingering paradox. Absolutely. It's a deep philosophical tension.
So how does he handle that?
Well, Husserl implicitly addresses the standard external solipsistic criticism by consistently rejecting the demand for evidence external to the transcendental realm.
Meaning,
Meaning, if a critic demands proof based on sense perception, show me the other person's body, or based on some biological observation or inductive reasoning from behavior.
they're demanding empirical evidence.
Exactly. They're asking for proof from the natural world that Husserl has intentionally bracketed. Husserl insists that the analysis must remain within the strict transcendental limits he set.
He won't cheat by bringing in outside data.
He can't, if the project is to succeed on its own terms. He must demonstrate that the concepts of other and objective world can be constituted purely from within the reduced ego, using only the resources of pure conceptual necessity and the structure of experience itself without any empirical input smuggled back in.
So his defense is fundamentally methodological. He's basically saying, look, I am solving the problem within the specific parameters I set up for a truly foundational philosophy. If you're demanding external empirical evidence, you haven't actually accepted the necessity of the radical reduction in the first place.
That's a very accurate summary. This refusal to play the traditional metaphysical game of proving existence is what makes the analysis so incredibly difficult for many people to follow.
But also potentially so powerful if it works.
It's powerful because it attempts to make the concept of the other not just empirically probable, but structurally, conceptually necessary for consciousness itself.
Okay, we definitely need to turn now to some of the specific criticisms this incredibly ambitious project has faced, particularly from really major figures in 20th century philosophy, like Paul Ricoeur and Jean-Paul Sartre.
Right, the heavy hitters.
And our sources seem to highlight that many of these high-profile critiques stem from, well, insufficient attention being paid to that fundamental distinction we just spent time on, constitution of meaning versus proof of existence.
That's exactly right. When the specific philosophical problem Husserl is addressing gets misread, or maybe just not fully appreciated, then his analysis in the fifth meditation often gets presented really briefly, maybe incompletely, and that leads to these frankly, monumental misunderstandings of his actual goal.
Is there a specific example of this misreading?
Yes. One mentioned clearly in our sources concerns the title of paragraph 42 in the Cartesian Meditations.
Okay, what about it?
Apparently, many critics read that title as suggesting that Husserl intends to refute solipsism directly, like offer a conclusive knockout proof against it, proving other minds exist in the traditional sense.
Ah, so they expect a standard metaphysical argument.
Exactly. And because he doesn't provide that kind of traditional proof, because he can't, given his method, these critics then conclude that phenomenology fails on its own terms, and that it does logically lead to solipsism after all.
So they judge him based on a goal he never actually set for himself.
Precisely. And this misinterpretation often forms the basis of the broader idealism critique.
Idealism? How does that come in?
Well, the argument goes something like this. If I, the transcendental ego, am the ultimate source, the locus where all meaning is constituted,
The starting point.
then it seems like the world and even the other person only exist for me as structures within my consciousness. And that sounds an awful lot like philosophical idealism, the idea that reality is fundamentally mental or conscious.
Okay, I can see how that charge arises.
Let's look specifically at Paul Ricoeur, as our sources discuss him. Ricoeur is characterized as basically accepting this objection. He feels that Husserl's phenomenology, because it's restricted solely to the analysis of my consciousness, simply cannot account for other people in a way that preserves their genuine independence, their otherness.
He thinks Husserl stays trapped in the subjective.
Essentially, yes. Ricoeur views Husserl's whole procedure as a form of transcendental idealism.
And why is that a problem for Ricoeur? What's he afraid of losing?
He worries that Husserl's theory of object constitution, the whole idea that meaning and objective stability are built up through the transcendental ego and its relation to the alter ego, is itself an idealistic thesis.
Okay.
And he thinks this underlying idealism is ultimately responsible for what he sees as Husserl's failure to truly resolve the problem of the other. Ricoeur seems to feel that if the objective world's fundamental meaning originates in my constitutive activity, even if shared,
then it's still somehow dependent on me.
yes, that even the most objective facts are still somehow contingent on the structure of consciousness, making the world lack the robust, independent reality we normally assume it has. He thinks Husserl needs a way to get outside the confines of the transcendental ego altogether.
Which Husserl, by definition, cannot do within the reduction.
Exactly.
This sounds very similar to something called the interlocutor's objection mentioned in the sources.
It's very closely related, yes. The interlocutor's objection basically argues that Husserl ends up presupposing the very thing he needs to prove, namely the existence of other subjects.
How did that argument go?
The critic asserts that if Husserl is only demonstrating that objects and others are constituted by individual consciousness, even if the structure is universal, then he's only proving that the world exists for the ego. They feel he's kind of cheating by structurally requiring the possibility of the alter ego for objectivity, rather than providing a clean derivation of it from purely non-ego sources.
They think he smuggles the other in.
In a way, yes. This view claims that the existence of everything other than the intending ego is ultimately presupposed as something to be perceived or constituted, which undermines the claim to a truly radical, presuppositionalist starting point.
So, in simple terms, the critics are basically saying, you assumed the possibility of the other from the start, therefore you didn't really derive or prove the other.
That's the essence of it. And this line of thinking leads directly to Jean-Paul Sartre's famous, and many would say, misinterpretation of Husserl.
Sartre, what did he argue?
It's argued that Sartre essentially maintained Husserl as a classic idealist, maybe akin to someone like George Berkeley.
Berkeley is to be perceived.
Exactly. Sartre seems to fail to interpret Husserl's project as the radical beginning on the problem of other minds that Husserl intended. Instead, Sartre apparently sees it as just another failed attempt at traditional metaphysics that ultimately traps the ego in his own subjective perceptions, unable to genuinely reach the independent other.
But Husserl isn't Berkeley, is he? Berkeley actually denied the existence of mind-independent matter. Husserl isn't denying existence.
No, he's suspending judgment on existence. That's the crucial difference. He's bracketing the existence question in order to clarify the meaning first.
Right. It's a methodological suspension, not an ontological denial.
Absolutely. And Husserl, or a defender of Husserl, would likely argue that this whole line of criticism from Ricoeur, Sartre, the interlocutor, does not render phenomenology a philosophical failure.
Why not?
Because from the phenomenological standpoint, the critic simply hasn't understood phenomenology from within. They haven't adopted the radical phenomenological attitude themselves.
They're still standing outside demanding the wrong kind of proof.
Exactly. They're stuck demanding a resolution to the traditional metaphysical problem of existence, whereas Husserl's focus, as we've stressed, is exclusively on determining the meaning and the conceptual possibility of asserting the existence of other minds, rather than merely its empirical truth or falsity.
So if a critic walks in and demands, say, sense perception evidence for the other person,
Husserl could essentially respond that their objection itself demonstrates they haven't performed the epity. They haven't adopted the necessary attitude for this specific kind of foundational investigation.
He's trying to build the conceptual toolkit first before making any declarations about what's empirically true or false out in the world?
Precisely. The a priori conceptual nature of the analysis is absolutely non-negotiable for the success of his project as he defined it.
It's all about showing that the possibility of intersubjectivity is a necessary conceptual structure.
Yes, one that logically precedes and grounds any subsequent empirical claim we might make about sharing a true world with others. And that's why his task, the task of constitution, retains its methodological and philosophical priority over the traditional problem of existence. #tag outro.
So after this really quite complex conceptual journey through Husserl's fifth meditation. What does this all mean for you, the learner? Where does it leave us? Well, we've hopefully clarified that Husserl's project isn't some kind of clumsy, failed attempt to prove something obvious, like other people exist.
Definitely not that.
Instead, it's a really profound, almost architectural exploration of the very foundations of philosophy. He's asking us to move beyond simply accepting reality as given, and instead to look closely at the necessary conceptual structures that even allow us to build a shared reality together.
I think that's right. And Husserl leaves us with a strikingly sophisticated, if demanding, understanding of objectivity.
How so?
It's not some solitary brute fact just sitting out there unapproachable. For Husserl, objectivity is secured by the possibility of intersubjectively identical truth.
Truth that can be the same for everyone.
Yes, and that truth is validated ultimately through mutual experience and fundamentally through mutual criticism.
That validation piece seems key.
It is. This really redefines truth, doesn't it? It moves it from being potentially a solitary, private intellectual exercise into something that is profoundly social. It establishes a communal standard of public accountability for claims.
So, if your claim to truth cannot, in principle, withstand the potential criticism of every other subject, then it lacks genuine objective validity in his system.
That's the high standard. The ultimate implication here, then, is that these concepts we rely on, objective world, objectively valid result, they are inherently dependent concepts.
Dependent on what?
They inherently presuppose the prior conceptual possibility, the structure of intersubjectivity. The truly foundational concept turns out to be the shared possibility of consciousness itself.
Okay.
Indeed. Which brings us right back, full circle perhaps, to that ultimate persistent paradox we touched upon earlier. The point where the philosophical tension remains highest.
Which
That's
is
the transcendental genesis.
Yeah.
The origin story of the objective world, even of the co-constituted, the other subject. This entire complex process is observed, analyzed, and constituted entirely for the standpoint of the initiating transcendental subject.
That I who performed the reduction in the first place.
Exactly.
So this raises a really powerful final question, doesn't it? One that seems to remain right at the core of phenomenology.
What question is that for you?
Well, if objectivity is ultimately constituted by shared consciousness, but the analysis of that shared consciousness necessarily begins solely within the confines of my reduced ego, does that shared reality, does intersubjectivity itself ultimately remain a transcendental conceptual fact for me, for the initiating consciousness? Is the objective world, in the final analysis, still founded on the inescapable mindness of my own transcendental ego, even if the structures discovered are claimed to be universal?
That is the paradox, isn't it? The paradox of trying to found universal objective truth from a starting point that is methodologically solitary.
Something profound to mull over as you navigate your own objective and hopefully shared world.
Indeed. Until our next deep dive.
Thank you for joining us for the